5, 10. 15.
Thank you so much, Rosie. Gosh, if everyone had a Rosie to plug their book. Thank you, Rosie. I really resisted writing this book. There were stories that were had been written about. Actually, one of these reviewers said to me last week that his heart sank when he sees the word Sackville-West. And I know what he means, because sort of mine did too. But there were secrets in our family and patterns of secrets in our family that resonated all the way down 7 generations, starting, as Rosie said, with my grandmother's grandmother, who was a Spanish flamenco dancer born in Malaga to a washerwoman, gypsy, who worked really hard, washed really hard, saved up for her daughter to go to flamenco lessons, negotiated a contract with her dancing teacher in that Pepita would marry the dancing teacher and therefore get the lessons for free. And Pepita became the world's most famous flamenco dancer. She was incredibly sexy. She had hair all the way down below her bottom. And she, having married the dancing teacher, fell in love with my grandmother's grandfather. They could not marry. So their relationship, which produced 7 children, was secretive, and especially secretive from Pepita's mother, the wonderful washer lady, Catalina, who nearly went mad trying to find out who her daughter was having all these babies with. The eldest of those, the daughters of those children, the first one was a son, the second one was a daughter, who was my grandmother's mother. And she was brought up with her siblings in this gated, very, very dramatic, grand house that Pepita had built for herself with all her earnings and a little bit from the lover. Behind these gates, on which, when I went there and saw that the coronet of the Sackville-West, which was the name of her lover, had been put bogusly on the top, nobody ever going anywhere near her because she was a Catholic woman, the mother of 7 illegitimate children, that people would cross the street to go anywhere near her. And it was a miserable, miserable and very lonely and trapping sort of an environment for not just Pepita, but for her children. Her daughter, Victoria, Pepita got rather bigger as she got older, is on the left, and her daughter Victoria was semi-orphaned when Pepita died in childbirth with her last child, and the Sackville-West father went off and took up his diplomatic post in Argentina. So poor Victoria grew up in an orphanage in France until she was suddenly rescued from this isolation and promoted by Queen Victoria, no less, to be her father's right-hand woman in the embassy in Washington. And so going from this sort of extraordinarily trapped society in Arcachon, the south of France, with her mother, then to the isolation in the convent, and then suddenly, wham, bang, into the embassy, 58-year-old President of the United States, smitten with this 18-year-old, proposed. She denied him. It was all denied in the papers. And then she married her cousin rather judiciously, thereby legalizing herself and becoming the chatelaine of his house, which was called Knoll, which is this great big house in Sevenoaks in Kent. And so suddenly her daughterhood and her secrets had somehow sort of come full circle. She was a society hostess who had all sorts of important people to stay in this extraordinary house. But then she had a daughter, and the experience, I'm thinking of Imelda talking about Vera Drake earlier, the experience of childbirth in the 1880s was so horrific that Victoria refused ever to sleep with her cousin, brackets husband, ever again, and to focus her love instead on the daughter. The daughter was called Vita, and she was my grandmother. And Victoria at first thought, I have a little girl, I can lavish all my love on her. I will take her out carriage driving, except the trouble is her hair is too fine, and unfortunately her hereditary nose is too big. I'll give her some dolls. Vita loathed dolls. I will dress her up as a wisteria basket. And so this poor child, who was in fact wearing khaki uniform, had a gun of her own and went out with all the village boys putting putty up their sisters' noses without her mother knowing, grew into something of a beauty painted by Laszlo on the left, but actually on the right there was Vita, who was really harboring an enormous secret of her own from her mother, which was that she was in love with a woman and sleeping with a woman. Her mother had her suspicions. Her father just loved her unconditionally, like fathers in my family at least sort of always do with their daughters. But she did make a marriage with my grandfather, Harold. However, her homosexuality overwhelmed her, really, although they were once asked, my grandparents, have you ever collaborated on anything, in terms of have you ever written a book together? And my grandfather's answer was, yes, we have 2 sons. But Harold's beauty, sorry, I'm looking at Sissinghurst now. Harold and Vita loved each other, but she was in love with a woman called Violet Trefusis. She eloped with her. She left the 2 little boys behind. She left her husband behind. This is in the 1919. An aeroplane with no sides was found by my grandfather and the husband of the other woman. They chased them across the Atlantic. There was a scene in a bedroom with the 2 women in the bed, screaming, shouting, and finally Vita came back, but not reconciled to being a heterosexual woman. And when she returned, she wrote a memoir or an account of that particular love affair. She wrote it in the sort of white heat still of the love affair. In the memoir, she says, oh, I must stop now. The telephone is ringing. It's Mitya, her lover. So she's still in the love affair. And this document had an enormous influence on me because she says in it, I hope that one day somebody reading this may understand what it is to be so stigmatized, to have the love for another human being so unrecognized, so shameful. This is my secret at the moment, but maybe one day there will be a kinder, gentler, more tolerant society that will understand and find some resonance in what I am writing. And the book, her memoir, was published 50 years later after her death by my father in a book called Portrait of a Marriage. And when I read that, and I'd been thinking about whether to write about the patterns and the destructive nature that secrecy can have on an individual and on the wider family and on society, even as a wider circle, those two lines in Vita's memoir sort of pushed me towards writing something, because I knew that if I was to write this book at all, I would need to follow it through if I was to be honest and to stick to my intention, which was to be honest, and I would have to talk about myself and my own secrets. Vita, I put this picture in because it's lovely. It's Sissinghurst, and this is Vita and Harold in old age, where they had a tremendous marriage, actually, based on the great Khalil Gibran saying of, "Let there be spaces in your togetherness." Very, very good. My father, being the child of Vita, had it reached the age of 36 and never been to bed with anyone. Someone he tried once, he had a girlfriend, he tried to take her socks off, and he did it so badly that the woman said, "For heaven's sake, go back and learn how to remove clothes before you come and take any more of mine off." So he went away, remained, he was 36, but he was a member of parliament for a very conservative seat, Bournemouth. And people were beginning to talk because he was unmarried. So he met my mother, who was trapped in a horrible, snobbish, tight, opinionated Tory family. And she needed escape. She was 24, he was 36. She was also virginal, but virginal in absolutely every sense of the word, as innocent as it could possibly be. She'd never heard of T.S. Eliot, she'd never heard of Dante. My father thought, I can teach her. I can show her these things. I can take her to classical Greece. I can mold her. The awful secret that emerged as I did put myself through the experience of finding out about my parents, which is a strange and difficult and shocking and sometimes horrifying experience for a child. The secret was really that they didn't love each other. They were both marrying for their own particular reasons, one for escape and the other for respectability. And very soon after their marriage, they had me. I don't really know quite how that happened. I do actually, but I'm not sure I can stand up here and say. Anyway, I was born, and my mother had contracted tuberculosis when I was just tiny. And so I had nothing to do with her for a year, because in the 1950s, when you had TB, you had to be in isolation. And so she recovered. We had a sort of family life the dog was named, I was named after the dog. The dog was called Romeo. She then sort of slithered into, what can I say? An absolute total lack of confidence, which manifested itself in various addictive behavior. First of all, pills, secondly, sex, and thirdly, alcohol. And she died age 57, 30 years ago, broken, and I couldn't reach her, and I wished I could, and I tried, and she pushed me away. She was frightened of telling her secret. And after her death, to my own horror, it happened to me. And I was unhappy for various reasons, partly the nose, but there were other things too, and I drank. And all I can say is that Vita's hope in that book, where she wrote that about hoping for a kinder and gentler and more tolerant and more understanding, and above all, more communicative society, is the one in which I am the beneficiary to live. Because for me, it was possible, with a great deal of courage, not on my part, but actually on my children, my 2 daughters, and my brother, Adam, who told me, there is help here, but you're the one who's got to ask for it. We can't make you. And because I didn't want to die, and because I thought I might, I asked. And there are some lovely secrets, like falling in love and finding out that you're going to have a baby and, I don't know, discovering that you can make chocolate souffle. There are some lovely secrets, but there are some that are corrosive and destructive. And I personally love it that we can dare, as a society, to talk about things that we find shameful, because there are going to be so many other people who say, I felt like that too, but this is what I did. And so, what can I say? Somebody said, oh, this sounds such a sad story. Actually, it's not. I don't think so. In the end, it sort of worked out. Well, anyway, so far, that's me at Sissinghurst there. And that's with my girls. And then that is Imo, who is 2. Oh, goodness, sorry. And I was just in the park with her today. And anyway, she's the great hope. And I just wish everything lovely for her and for patterns and secrets never to be part of her life. Thanks.